Hello everyone, and welcome to the next session. This is delayed because unfortunately yesterday we had some technical difficulties. So we're actually streaming this through from another platform. Yeah, we're all now pointing at Carrie-Ann because
sorry, the NHS firewall was not my friend.
Hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll have it fixed by this afternoon because Carrie-Ann is joining us again a little bit later on. If not, you'll see us again on this streaming. Anyway, so I'm sure all of you know already who Carrie-Ann and Lee are, but just for those people that don't, so Lee is a coach and consultant. She founded Sunday Skies in 2020, supporting senior leaders to transform their personal impact through communication and connection. And Carrie-Ann is an established communications director who has worked in healthcare communications for 16 years and is the founder of Cat's Pajamas Communications. She's also co-founder of the Awesome Women's Retreat and co-collab on Take the Lead with Lee. So today they're actually filming a live recording of their podcast, Take the Lead. So if you've got any questions at the end, you can put them in the question box. Like say, take your photos, share it on socials for you to be the audience of this live recording. So I'm going to hide myself now and pass it over to these. So see you in a bit.
Thank you, Kate. So it is lovely to be here. We are, as Kate's explained, we're on a different platform. I am less technically incompetent than Carrie-Ann. This is a no blame culture here. No, I can see the other platform, so I am keeping an eye on people's comments and stuff, but there is a little bit of a time lag. So we're going to try our best to navigate these two realms, but we might just ignore you. Don't take it personally if we do. So we are delighted to be back at commsHERO week, and actually just to be back after yesterday's shenanigans.
Yes, sorry, I owe you a big gin and tonic, I know.
You do, and it's too early for me to have gin today, so I have got a cup of tea with me. So yes, that will be my friend throughout. So last year we were here as mere Instagram sensations. Is that fair to say?
I think that would be fair to say, yeah.
But we're legit podcast stars now, so in our parents' eyes anyway. I don't even know if my parents know what a podcast is, but
I was going to say your parents are really down with it because mine definitely don't. They still think I've got a totally different job to the one I actually have.
So Kate's done our introductions for us, so we won't go over all of that, but I will just do a brief introduction into how to take the lead. So it's our podcast that questions everything you've ever known or we've ever known about leadership. We challenge all those myths and those stereotypes, and we get a bit embarrassing and a bit challenging and share our own stories along the way as well. We started this as an Instagram live series back in early 2021 over a G&T or two. And earlier this year, we went live with our first series of the podcast. So all very exciting. Series 2, just to give a bit of a plug, is out. Trailer launches this week. If you visit howtotakethelead.com, you can subscribe and you can follow us and catch up on series 1 if you haven't watched it already, but like, why haven't you listened? And you can also follow us on Insta and Twitter. We are all very professional this series, even though my introduction probably hasn't given you the best insight into how professional we now are. So today's episode is a special one. We are trying to record this as an extra bonus podcast episode. So and we would like to get your comments and feedback throughout on the topics we're covering. And I wanted to kick things off by looking at the concept of how challenging we are of ourselves as leaders. And I don't mean that in the sense of the situations in which we're working in aren't challenging, because bloody hell, we know we can deal with challenging situations. I want to focus more on leadership mindset and what sets great leaders apart and how challenging we are in terms of our thinking and approach to said challenging situations. So if we look back over the past few months, maybe even the past few years, I think the same issues about leadership keep coming up. And when I see that, I mean the leadership response to issues still feels, dare I say it, a bit stuck in the past or a bit out of touch. If you just take the whole post-pandemic response to people working from home as one example, there's still that myth around, if you're at home, you're not working hard enough, blah, 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 blah. And I don't know, I just think it just makes me question whether we as leaders are being challenging in our responses to the challenges that face us. That's my preamble, Carrie-Ann. That's where my brain's at.
So where my brain is at in response to that is, no, I don't think we are as leaders being challenging enough. I think we have, at least in my experience, seen a bit of a retreat back into the old, particularly when we think about ways of working. I think so. You've mentioned the pandemic there. I think we had a real opportunity as leaders across organisations, across businesses, to really think about how we could innovate and think about working in a different way, supporting our workforce differently, supporting our clients differently. And I think we started to do that, and then I'm not really sure the rationale why, but I feel like we've gone backwards a little bit, and actually we haven't been as adaptable as we could have been as leaders. We've retreated back into those old ways of working. You've quite rightly said it, and I've had experience and seen this happening already, where it's that kind of 3-line whip, like, now we can get back into the office, that's where we should be. I think some organisations and leaders did it really well. I think, they took that opportunity, and right, we're just shutting down offices, for example, which means, when we come through the other end of this pandemic, there's not going to be that opportunity to go back to those old ways of working. But I think many people, and I don't know if that's a comfort thing, like we feel comforted by going back to working in the way we always have, but I don't think we've gripped that as much as we could, and I don't think we've been as adaptable as we could be as leaders. I think a few things have come up with me particularly, and I won't talk too much about it because I know we've got a whole episode on this in the series, but particularly with the changes, I think, in government, I think we're seeing that we are back in a space where we have not back in, I think we've been in it for some time, but a space where the leadership role modelling at that level, they're not people that are actively listening to what people actually need. They're not demonstrating values and actions that I think people can relate to and feel like, I'm being taken seriously. The things that are important to me are being taken seriously. And I think there's a danger as leaders that we're not doing that active listening. And I don't feel like we've got as many diverse views coming through to help kind of shape approaches as leaders. And I know one of the stats we talk about from some research that's happened is around culture. And it's, 84% of employees view the ability to create cultures of trust where employees feel empowered as key capabilities that leaders need to develop. So I don't think we're delivering on that, because I think we're falling back into those old patterns and those old styles of leadership where we are not empowering colleagues necessarily to innovate, to work differently, to be trusted even sometimes with their own kind of working pattern and working day to be able to deliver. So I feel like that's a bit of a downer, but that is generally how I'm feeling at the moment in that leadership space.
Do you know, one of the things that strikes me about, we look at the characteristics of what makes a leader, and being innovative is one of those characteristics. And for me, innovation is doing something different, but it's very forward looking. It's about, how can we move into a different space? Yet a lot of what I see in leadership practice seems to be relying on things that happened in the past. So it's reactive to stuff rather than being proactive or thinking differently about stuff. And I wonder how we move into a space where as leaders we start to be a bit more predictive about what the future could look like, and be a bit more inclusive in terms of listening from, I won't get on my soapbox because we have covered this in one of the episodes that are coming out shortly, but Stephen Bartlett really got my goat a couple of weeks ago with his comment about the whole Gen Z generation and the view that they're almost a bit work shy, whereas I see it as a reframing of maybe they're a bit clearer on their boundaries. And it really annoyed me that that's the narrative that we've got about a whole generation of our workforce, when as leaders we need to be thinking about how do we adapt to a multi-generational workforce. And that's just one example. So how can we start in our own thinking to explore what a future looks like rather than constantly being pulled back to the past?
I think there's something about our own professional development as leaders, isn't there, and challenging ourselves to step outside of our comfort zone in terms of how we choose to develop ourselves and the views that we take. So again, for me, there's something about making that time to do that development, but there's also something in that diversity of thought. And I think we need to be more open as leaders to really listen and hear what those we are leading want to tell us. And I think there's a question that's come through in the chat around advice to leaders around empowering colleagues and enabling them to feel more trusted. I think we have to value our colleagues. If our colleagues feel valued in our organisations, then I feel like that's where you build that empowerment from. They feel trusted to get on and do their jobs. I think there's a couple of things there for me. It's about channels that we create to have those conversations and to have that dialogue as leaders, being open, transparent, visible within our organisations. And so I think that's a really important part of doing that. And I think there's something about kind of listening and then demonstrating that we're taking action. And I think, particularly in my experience within the NHS, we're very good at asking lots of questions. We're really good at surveying, whether it's patients, colleagues. But for me, it's something about, as a leader, it's then what action do you take based on what you've heard. And I think that's sometimes our downfall, that we need to be able to demonstrate that we're taking action. And where there's a reason why we maybe can't take action, maybe there's financial constraints. So we're hearing, people need certain things to be able to get on and deliver in their roles. Be transparent and open about that. Don't go to ground and just be quiet because you don't think people are going to like the fact that you can't take that action. I think you just need to be creating that dialogue all the time as a leader, being open to hear things and open to take action where you can. I not to get too deep into this part of the conversation, and it may well have changed since I've stepped away from corporate, but my sense of asking people always also seemed to be quite historic look back. So, how are you feeling now about what's happened, rather than how do you want to feel about what we can do? So I do wonder, fundamentally, if we have to do a bit of a relook at all levels in terms of the types of questions we ask and all of that. Someone's commented that around the working from home thing, that some leaders have maybe created or encouraged a bad leadership habits in terms of micromanaging and stuff because of being at home. Sorry, I paraphrased your comment really poorly then. But they were making a comment about, some might say that they've created bad leadership habits because, and I would agree with that, certainly in terms of what I've seen from people I work with. And again, this comment we've had about fairness, where, new ways of working often now means being able to work from home. But some of us work in industries where people are not able to work from home. They have to be in person. So there's that perception of disparity there, and that's not fair. So I think there's a role for us as leaders and us as communicators in terms of how we have those conversations in our organisation. And again, I think for me, it's about that transparency and being really clear. There'll be certain people whose the nature of their role might mean that they can't always work from home or from a different base, because they might need to, see a patient in person, for example. But actually, what else have we got going on in the organisation that is of benefit to those individuals, that help them to feel valued, feel trusted, feel empowered in the workplace supports their well-being, for example. So I think it's about having those honest conversations and being upfront about that, not trying to badge, you know, one particular thing as the be all and end all that will make people feel like it's a great place to work and that you're a brilliant leader. I think there's lots of nuances to that, but that actually as leaders you need to be able to communicate the rationale, but also, you know, what's the offer for those people who might not benefit from working in a different way.
Yeah. So we're at commsHERO. We're surrounded by loads of influential communicators who I know are doing brilliant jobs in very varying but challenging circumstances. We've both been in the industry for about 20 years. And I don't know about you, and I'm probably going to be hugely unpopular in what I'm about to say, but I feel like I keep hearing the same discussions around communications leadership, meaning needing a seat at the top table or getting the voice heard means having a seat at that top table. And I think it doesn't feel like the conversation's moved on that much, even though I know so much work's happened to professionalise the industry. And I think for me, when I've been thinking about it, I look to other disciplines and I look to the notion of what does a leader bring? A leader's supposed to bring vision, and demonstrating a vision that solves a problem that matters to the organisation or to the team or whoever in the kind of crudest sense. And if you look at maybe HR, finance and other disciplines, are they getting a seat at the table because they are able to bring what they do back to a bigger vision and picture? And it's not so much about we need HR voices. It's more that we need to talk about the people, for example. We don't need someone who's got a finance hat on, but we need people to talk about what finance means for the company. And I question whether we do that well enough as communicators and as communication leaders. And I wonder, in our pursuit to be represented at a more senior level, we've focused in on the wrong question, which kind of links to what we were talking about earlier. We've made it about role and seniority and not done enough to demonstrate perhaps the actual problems we're solving at an organisational level that's really tangible to people who don't work in communications. And I suppose my question is, like, A, am I wrong and has it all moved on? I just need to go and sit in the corner. And B, you know, what needs to happen for leaders in communications to start to disrupt that narrative a little bit?
So I don't think you're wrong at all. I think we do keep having the same conversations as communications professionals. I absolutely love your point of, are they the right conversations? Are we asking the right question? And I've got some thoughts on that too. But I also think one of our issues, not to be one of those leaders now who is getting stuck in the past and not being forward thinking that we've just talked about, is I'm not sure we've been having the conversations with the right people, because my experience has been we've been having those conversations within our profession a lot of the time with other communications leaders. And actually the conversations we need to be having are with all of those other leaders within our organisations and more broadly, to kind of do exactly what you've said, which is demonstrate the value that we bring to an organisation in that leadership space. And I guess a couple of things sprang to mind for me when you were talking. One was around kind of the data, the insights, that evaluation piece. And I think we have really good pockets of good practice around that evaluation, that data, that insight. But I do think it's something that I hear a lot within our profession that we don't do as well as we could, and that we often don't make the time for, particularly if you're an in-house comms leader. You know, often you're moving on to the next program or project before you've even had the chance to evaluate impact. But for me, it's about that evaluation being linked to your organisation's objectives and priority outcomes, not necessarily specifically to communications outcomes. I think that's your point. You know, other professions at the top table demonstrate value by talking about the amount of money saved across an entire organisation, cost improvement programmes, impact on quality and performance of services, amount of staff recruited to fill vacancy rates, to deliver better outcomes, for example. And I think sometimes as comms professionals, we get a bit inward looking into our own sphere of expertise and don't share more broadly. So I absolutely agree with that point. And I think we should be more strategic outside of our own sphere of expertise. And I think we have a role to play in supporting the leaders of our organisations outside of comms, because I feel like we can sometimes be in danger of being so comms focused in that space that we become like, for example, the equality, diversity, inclusion agenda, where organisations go, oh, we've got an EDI lead, so it's their responsibility to be good at inclusion. I think we have to share our expertise and experience to develop better leaders across the organisation and demonstrate value there.
Yeah, if you're going to reframe the question, for me, it's less about have you got communication sat at the top table. It's more about how are those at the top table demonstrating that they are great communicators. And I don't mean that they can just write a newsletter. How are they making an impact? How are they taking people with them? How are they taking people on the journey of change that an organisation's needed? How are boards being recruited with those skills in mind, rather than thinking it's just got to sit with one person at the top table? And I think that's the question that we perhaps aren't challenging enough of our peers at that top level, and B, we're not giving them the information, insight, support, whatever, to make the case of why it's important that your coup, for example, can be just as impactful in selling the vision of an organisation as the chief exec can be.
Absolutely. I think if we're in agreement that good leaders need to be good communicators, excellent listeners, use storytelling to deliver on their vision, then we're the experts in helping them to develop in that space. So we have a role to support those others. It can't just be us communicating a vision as comms people. I think we have to support our leaders to do that. And I think that's where we can demonstrate some real value in that leadership space. But also, I think, we need to consider how we can influence in that space without always having a seat at the table. We bring that expertise regardless of whether we're at the top table or not. And actually, we need to start using it and supporting other leaders to see where we can really help them to achieve on their vision.
Yeah. And does some of it start at even a more junior level in organisations? Because if I think about it, the amount of times we might dismiss what colleagues in other departments might be bringing in terms of communications, because they've used some clip art or they overuse PowerPoint or whatever it might be. We know best. I don't agree with any of those things, by the way, but if they, we don't see them as communicators, therefore we don't value the insights they might bring that could enhance communication, and we want to almost either tell them what to do or take over ownership of something, rather than looking at how we upskilling, how we providing them with the resources and the knowledge so that they are taking more ownership. And if we genuinely start to welcome the views and insights that they can bring, because they'll know their people a lot more that they're trying to reach and all of that, that might start to build a bit of a groundswell, because we're not kind of putting ourselves in this little box that then we struggle to break out of the more senior we get.
Absolutely. I'm conscious of time. We've had our 2-minute warning. I feel like we could carry on for much longer, but we've been kept to time by the fabulous Kate. So
have we had a 2-minute warning?
We had a 5-minute warning and a 2-minute warning, Lee.
I've got the comments covered over, so I'm not paying any attention. So I'm glad you're there. So to wrap up in the spirit of all our podcasts, then, we always end with a bit of a how-to. So my how-to for this conversation is, how can we be more challenging of ourselves as leaders? A couple of top tips.
I think challenge our own thinking in terms of being forward-looking, not backward-looking in our own development, and think about how we can broaden that conversation about communications influence in organisations and in leadership teams.
Fab. My how-to is start asking different questions if we want different answers. There.
I love it.
Have we done it in time, Kate? Sorry.
Yes, just we started a little bit later though anyway, so I gave you a little bit extra.